The shutter clicked in the darkness. The shutter clicked softly in the darkness, almost inaudible beneath Madison's thundering heartbeat. 5% battery. One chance through the slats of the closet door. She watched the shadowy figure move. Across her bedroom floor, his scarred face briefly illuminated by the beam of his flashlight. 2 years ago, another intruder had taken her mother in this very room. Now, at 12 years old, Madison gripped her mother's old camera with white knuckles, her thumb hovering over the button that would capture his face. The floorboard creaked. He was coming closer. Madison's breath caught in her throat as his gloved hand reached for the closet door. She had already called 911, but would they arrive in time? The stranger's fingers curled around the handle. Madison pressed the shutter button. The flash exploded in the darkness like a sudden burst of daylight. The intruder staggered back with a startled cry, and in that frozen moment of brilliance, their eyes met. The Carter family farmhouse. The Carter family farmhouse stood 3 miles outside Detroit's city limits, a 2-story Victorian with weathered blue paint and a wraparound porch built in 1897. It had witnessed generations of life, love, and loss. Most recently, the brutal murder of Elaine Carter 2 years earlier. The once picturesque property now carried an air of melancholy, with overgrown gardens and empty bird feeders Elaine had once meticulously maintained. Madison Carter hadn't always been so serious. Before her mother's death, she'd been a typical 10-year-old with an infectious laugh. Now 12, she moved through the world with the cautious awareness of someone much older. Her sandy blonde hair was often pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her blue eyes, so like her mother's, examining the world through the viewfinder of her mother's vintage Nikon. Photography had become both her shield and her voice when words failed. Roger Carter worked night shifts at Detroit Memorial Hospital as a respiratory therapist. A tall man with stooped shoulders and premature gray at his temples, he carried the weight of single parenthood with quiet determination. The community had opinions about his decision to sometimes leave Madison alone at night, opinions that grew louder after the break-in. But Roger had few options. Hospital bills and a mortgage demanded attention, and Madison had always seemed older than her years. Detective Sarah Jenkins had been first on the scene the night Elaine died. At 43, she'd seen more than her share of tragedy, but something about the Carter case had gotten under her skin. Perhaps it was Madison's eyes, wide with shock but eerily calm as she described finding her mother, or perhaps it was the nagging feeling that they'd arrested the wrong man. Either way, Sarah kept tabs on the family, driving past the old farmhouse during her patrol shifts more often than duty required. Devon Williams wasn't what most people pictured when they imagined a home intruder. At 32, his lean, almost scholarly appearance belied his criminal record. The distinctive scar running from his right temple to the corner of his mouth came from a prison fight, though he rarely spoke of it. What no one knew was his connection to the Carter family, a connection that would soon unravel everything Madison thought she understood about her mother's death. The night it began. Madison was working on her photography homework when it began. A simple assignment, capture ordinary objects from unusual angles, had kept her busy for hours. Her mother's camera clicked steadily as she photographed the worn banister, crystal doorknobs, and antique light fixtures that made the old farmhouse special. Despite its painful memories, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the west-facing windows, creating dramatic lighting that Madison was eager to capture. She had just finished setting up a shot of her mother's collection of vintage teacups when she heard it. A soft scraping sound from the side of the house. Madison froze, her finger hovering over the shutter button. Living in an old farmhouse meant strange noises were common, but this sounded different, deliberate. She set the camera down carefully and moved to the window, staying to one side, as her father had taught her. Nothing seemed amiss in the yard. The maple trees swayed gently in the October breeze, their fiery leaves occasionally breaking free to spiral toward the ground. Madison relaxed slightly and returned to her photography, but the prickling sensation at the back of her neck remained. She checked her phone. 6:17 p.m. Dad wouldn't be home until morning. She was on her own, as she often was during his night shifts. It was the silence that alerted her next. The constant background chorus of early evening, chirping birds, distant, Traffic, the old refrigerator's hum, suddenly ceased, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Then came the unmistakable sound of the back screen door opening, its characteristic squeak impossible to mistake. Madison had reminded her father a dozen times to oil that hinge. Now she was grateful for his procrastination. Heart hammering, Madison grabbed her phone and camera, moving quickly but quietly toward the hallway. The self-defense instructor her father had insisted she see after her mother's death had emphasized awareness above all else. Know your surroundings, plan your exits, identify what can be used as a weapon. She scanned the room, mapping her options. Front door, too exposed. Upstairs, potential trap. Closet in the study, perfect. Solid door, phone reception, and a window leading to the porch roof if necessary. As she edged toward the study, Madison heard heavy footsteps in the kitchen, not her father's familiar tread, but slower, cautious steps of someone trying to move quietly in an unfamiliar space. She slipped into the study and eased the door shut, turning the lock with agonizing slowness to avoid the click revealing her location. Safe for the moment, Madison dialed 911 with trembling fingers. To her horror, the battery indicator showed just 5%. She'd been using the phone as a timer for her long exposure photographs all afternoon, a rookie mistake that could now cost her everything. 1. What's your emergency? The dispatcher's calm voice was barely audible over Madison's thudding heart. Someone's broken into my house, she whispered. I'm alone. 1873 Willow Creek Road. Are you in a safe location? For now. I'm in the study closet. Can you describe the intruder? Madison realized she hadn't actually seen the person clearly. I don't know. I just heard them. That's okay. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line with me. Madison clutched the phone tighter. My battery's almost dead. All right. Listen carefully. If we get disconnected, stay hidden. Don't try to confront the intruder. Help is coming. The house groaned as someone moved through the living room, closer to her hiding place. Madison's eyes darted to her mother's camera, still clutched in her left hand. A crazy idea formed in her mind. If she could see the intruder, maybe get a photo. A sudden noise outside the study door made her flinch. The intruder was trying doors now, methodically making his way through the house. Madison pressed herself deeper into the closet as the study door handle jiggled. The lock held, but for how long? Then came the power cut. One moment, the faint glow of the desk lamp seeped under the closet door. The next, darkness enveloped her. This was no random outage. The intruder had cut the power, leaving Madison truly alone in the dark with a dying phone and a desperate plan forming in her mind. Madison, are you still there? The dispatcher's voice sounded thin and far away. The power's out, she whispered. He cut it. Officers are 5 minutes out. Can you stay hidden until then? Before Madison could answer, she heard the distinctive sound of glass breaking, followed by the study door swinging open. Her phone beeped once, a final warning before the battery died, and the call disconnected. In the sudden silence, Madison clutched her mother's camera like a talisman. 2 years of grief and therapy had taught her one thing. She was stronger than she looked. As the closet door began to open, Madison raised the camera. If this was her last act, she would at least look her attacker in the eye, just as her mother would have done. A desperate plan, Madison's decision to document, rather than just hide, stemmed from something deep within her, something that had been smoldering since that terrible night 2 years ago when she'd been too young, too scared to do anything but scream. The intruder's footsteps moved methodically through the study now, opening drawers, shifting books, clearly searching for something specific. This wasn't a random break-in. The realization clicked into place as surely as her mother's camera. Shudder. Through the slats in the closet door, Madison caught her first glimpse of the man, tall and lean, with methodical movements that suggested purpose rather than desperation. What struck her most was how ordinary he looked. Jeans, dark jacket, leather gloves, nothing like the monster she'd imagined. Then he turned, and the beam of his flashlight briefly illuminated his face, revealing the jagged scar that ran from temple to jaw. Madison's breath caught. She'd seen enough crime shows to know that distinctive marks made for better identification. Without thinking, she raised her camera. The flash was disabled. She'd been working with natural light for her homework, but the subtle click of the shutter seemed deafening in the silent room. The man paused, head cocked like a predator sensing prey. Madison held her breath, pressing against the closet's back wall as sweat trickled down her spine. 1 heartbeat. 2. He returned to rifling through her father's desk. Madison examined the digital display on her camera, keeping the screen angled away from the closet slats. The image was dark but distinguishable. His profile, the scar clearly visible. It wasn't enough. She needed his full face, needed clearer evidence. The 911 dispatcher's final words echoed in her mind. Officers are 5 minutes out. How long ago had that been? 2 minutes? 10? With her phone dead, time stretched and contracted unpredictably. A new sound cut through. Her thoughts. Sirens. Distant but approaching. The intruder tensed, abandoning the desk to move toward the window. Madison realized with growing horror that he was considering escape through the very window that gave her closet access to the porch roof. If he chose that route, there would be nowhere to hide. Instead, he cursed softly and headed for the study door. Madison's relief was short-lived as she remembered the layout of their home. To reach the back door from the study meant passing her mother's old sewing room, now converted into a darkroom, where Madison developed her analog photos. The room contained the only physical evidence of her mother's final project, a documentary series on local government corruption that Roger dismissed as Elaine's conspiracy theories. What if that's what the intruder was after? Madison made a split-second decision that would later be debated on morning talk shows and internet forums across the country. Instead of remaining safely hidden as instructed, she eased open the closet door and followed the intruder, camera in hand, desperate to document whatever he might take from the dark room. The farmhouse's familiar creaks worked to her advantage. She knew which floorboards to avoid, which hinges would betray her. The intruder moved with the uncertainty of someone in unfamiliar territory, while Madison navigated the darkness with the confidence of lifetime familiarity. She maintained her distance, using door frames and furniture as cover. At the darkroom entrance, the man paused, producing a small flashlight that he covered partially with his hand to create a muted red glow, similar to the darkroom's safe light. Another clue. This was no ordinary burglar. He knew exactly what he was looking for and how to preserve photographic materials. Madison raised her camera again, adjusting the settings for low light as her mother had taught her. The delicate click was drowned out by the approaching sirens, now close enough that blue and red lights flashed intermittently through the windows. The intruder worked more quickly now, rifling through chemical-stained envelopes and boxes of photographic paper. His movements grew frantic as he discovered what Madison already knew. The most important negatives weren't there. Elaine Carter had become increasingly paranoid in the weeks before her death, hiding her work throughout the house in unlikely places. The photo of the mayor accepting an envelope behind the lakeside development construction site was hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. The negative showing the police chief's brother-in-law with known drug traffickers was sealed inside the lining of an old winter coat. The intruder's frustration manifested in a sudden violent sweep of his arm that sent developing trays clattering to the floor. The noise was jarring after the tense silence, and Madison startled, bumping against the hallway table. A framed photo, Madison and her mother at the county fair, toppled and shattered. The man whirled toward the sound, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness directly into Madison's eyes. For one frozen moment, they stared at each other. The scarred intruder and the determined child with her mother's camera clutched to her chest. "You're Elaine's kid," he said, his voice surprisingly soft, almost sad. Madison took an instinctive step backward. "The police are almost here." "Good," he replied, his response nothing like what she expected. They should have been here 2 years ago when it mattered. Before Madison could process his cryptic words, headlights swept across the front of the house, followed by the squeal of brakes. The intruder glanced toward the window, then back at Madison. "Your mom tried to warn them. Remember that." He moved toward her, and Madison raised the camera like a shield. To her shock, he gently pushed it aside. "Not everything is what it seems, kid." The real danger isn't the guy breaking in, it's why he had to. The front door splintered open with a crash of wood and shouted commands. The intruder gave Madison one final inscrutable look before darting toward the kitchen and the back exit. Madison stood frozen in the hallway, her mother's camera still raised, the shutter clicking one final time as the intruder disappeared into the night, leaving her with nothing but questions and one extraordinary photograph that would soon turn her world upside down. The aftermath. The hours following Devon Williams' escape unfolded in a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. Madison sat wrapped in a shock blanket at the kitchen table, her father's arm around her shoulders as Detective Sarah Jenkins gently questioned her about the intruder. Roger had rushed home from his hospital shift, still wearing scrubs beneath, his hastily donned jacket, his face pale with terror and relief. "You're saying he knew your mother?" Detective Jenkins leaned forward, her weathered face intent. At 43, she carried herself with the careful composure of someone who had seen too much but refused to become hardened by it. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun, reading glasses perched on her nose as she made methodical notes. Madison nodded, clutching her mother's camera. "He said she tried to warn them, that the real danger wasn't him breaking in, but why he had to." Roger made a dismissive sound. "Elaine's conspiracy theories again. This man is obviously trying to manipulate you, Maddie." Detective Jenkins' eyes flickered to Roger, then back to Madison. "Perhaps, but I'd still like to see those photos you took." Madison handed over the camera with reluctance. It had been her mother's most prized possession, a professional-grade Nikon that had accompanied Elaine Carter to war zones and natural disasters during her photojournalism career. Before Madison's birth, Elaine had documented civil unrest and environmental catastrophes across the globe. Afterward, she'd turned her lens toward local issues, claiming the corruption in their own backyard deserved as much scrutiny as international crises. "We'll need to download these," Detective Jenkins said, carefully placing the camera in an evidence bag. "Don't worry, you'll get it back once we've processed the images." Madison's throat tightened. "Be careful with it, please." The detective's features softened. "I promise." She turned to Roger. "I'd like to have an officer remain outside tonight, given the circumstances." "Absolutely not," Roger interrupted. "The last thing Madison needs is more reminders of danger. We've spent 2 years trying to create normalcy." Madison glanced between them, recognizing the familiar tension. Detective Jenkins had been a constant, if unwelcome, presence after her mother's murder. She'd questioned the rushed investigation, the convenient suspect, a drifter with prior convictions, and the hasty case closure. Roger had eventually filed a complaint about her harassment, claiming her persistent questions were preventing their healing. "Dad," Madison said quietly, "I'd feel safer with someone watching the house." Roger's expression crumpled. He kissed the top of her head. "All right, pumpkin. Whatever helps you sleep tonight." After the officers left, with one remaining discreetly in a patrol car at the end of their long driveway, Madison retreated to her room. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old farmhouse sent her heart racing. Around 3 a.m., she crept downstairs to find her father at the kitchen table, staring into a cold cup of coffee. "Shouldn't you be sleeping?" he asked, without looking up. Madison shrugged, sliding into the chair across from him. "Couldn't. You either?" "No." He pushed the coffee mug away. "I keep thinking if something had happened to you." His voice broke. "I can't lose you too, Maddie. I just can't." "You won't." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Mom taught me to be strong. Remember?" A flash of something, pain, guilt, crossed Roger's face. "Your mother," he said slowly, "was the strongest person I've ever known, and the most stubborn." He hesitated. Did he say anything else about her? Madison considered the question. Her father had always dismissed Elaine's final investigative project. The arguments about it had grown increasingly heated in the weeks before her death. Madison had overheard her father begging her mother to drop it before someone got hurt. But Elaine had been adamant that the public deserved to know about the corruption surrounding the Lakeside Development Project. "Just what I told Detective Jenkins," Madison answered carefully. That Mom tried to warn people. Roger nodded, seemingly relieved. Get some sleep, Pumpkin. Things will look better in the morning. But morning brought a new kind of chaos. The story had leaked to the local news. Brave 12-year-old photographer catches home intruder on camera, complete with Madison's school picture and details about her mother's unsolved murder. By noon, their driveway was clogged with news vans and Madison's phone buzzed constantly with messages from classmates and strangers alike. This is exactly what I didn't want, Roger fumed, closing the blinds against the telephoto lenses aimed at their windows. Your privacy, your safety. A sharp knock at the back door interrupted him. Detective Jenkins stood on their porch, her expression grim. We need to talk, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Privately. Roger sent Madison upstairs, but she only pretended to go. Instead, she crouched at the top of the staircase where she could hear their conversation in the kitchen below. We identified him, Jenkins said without preamble. Devon Williams, former Marine, dishonorable discharge after an altercation with a superior officer. 2 breaking and entering charges, but nothing violent. So arrest him, Roger snapped. We're trying. But there's something else. A pause. The photos Madison took. There's something in the background of one of them. A document Williams was carrying, partially visible, but enough that our analysts could enhance it. What kind of document? Financial records, specifically transaction logs showing payments from Lakeside Development to city officials, including Police Chief Markham. Madison's breath caught. Her mother had been right all along. That's ridiculous, Roger said, but his voice lacked conviction. Some kind of forgery, maybe. Jenkins didn't sound convinced. It matches Elaine's allegations before her death, the ones no one took seriously. So what are you saying? Roger's voice rose. That my wife was murdered because of her investigation, that the police department covered it up? I'm saying we need to reopen Elaine's case, and we need to protect Madison. If Williams was looking for evidence Elaine gathered, evidence that's potentially worth millions in bribes and could send people to prison, then he won't be the last one coming after what your wife left behind. Madison retreated to her room, her mind racing. Her mother's words from years ago echoed in her memory. Sometimes, Maddie, a photographer's job isn't just to capture beauty, but to expose truth, even when that truth is ugly. Operation Truth over. The next 3 days, Madison threw herself into what she privately called Operation Truth. While police searched for Devon Williams and reporters camped outside their property, she methodically went through her mother's belongings, looking for the hiding places she knew Elaine had used for her most sensitive materials. She started with the hollowed-out "To Kill a Mockingbird," finding the negatives exactly where she remembered. Next came the winter coat with its carefully stitched lining, yielding more film and a small notebook written in her mother's distinctive handwriting. Most valuable was the false bottom in Elaine's old jewelry box, containing a USB drive that Madison had never seen before. Each night, after her father finally succumbed to exhausted sleep, Madison slipped into the basement where her mother's old laptop was stored. The password came to her instantly. Madison, Eleanor Carter 2012, her full name and birthday. The USB drive contained hundreds of photos and documents meticulously organized into folders with labels like Lakeside Financials, zoning violations, and police connections. Madison's photography training allowed her to recognize the skill behind her mother's work, the careful composition that captured incriminating details while remaining unobtrusive enough that her subjects never realized they were being photographed. Mayor Thompson accepting an envelope behind the construction trailer. Chief Markham meeting with known associates of Anton Vasco, the developer behind Lakeside. City council members leaving the Lakeside sales office after hours. Most disturbing were the photos in a folder labeled simply "Insurance." These showed Devon Williams, younger, without the scar, in military uniform, standing alongside Chief Markham at what appeared to be a family gathering. In another, Williams was shaking hands with Anton Vasco. A third showed him in conversation with Mayor Thompson. Madison was making connections her 12-year-old mind could barely comprehend. The man who had broken into their home wasn't a random criminal. He was connected to everyone in her mother's investigation. On the fourth day, while Roger was meeting with the school principal about Madison's temporary homeschooling arrangement, Detective Jenkins arrived unannounced at the back door. "I shouldn't be here," she said, glancing over her shoulder as Madison let her in. "I've been removed from the case. Conflict of interest, they're calling it. Because you believe my mom was right," Madison said. Jenkins studied her with surprise. "You've been doing some investigating of your own." Madison hesitated, then nodded. "I found things. Mom's research. That's why I'm here. Williams was captured this morning trying to cross into Canada." Jenkins lowered her. "Voilà." Before they took him into custody, he said something about Elaine having insurance evidence so damaging that if anything happened to her, it would automatically be released. He claimed that's why he broke in, not to hurt you, but to find this insurance before it destroyed everyone involved. "But Mom died 2 years ago," Madison frowned. "Why come looking now?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Jenkins said, "unless the timer on that insurance policy is just about to run out." The realization hit Madison like a physical blow. "The anniversary of her death. It's next week." Jenkins nodded, her eyes intense. "Whatever your mother set up, it triggers 2 years after her murder. Williams and his associates are getting desperate." Madison made a decision. "I have something to show you." She led Jenkins to her bedroom and retrieved the jewelry box with its false bottom, now empty except for a single folded paper she'd discovered that morning. It was a letter addressed to "My Precious Madison," written in her mother's handwriting. "I haven't read it yet," Madison admitted, handing it over. "I was scared." Jenkins unfolded it carefully, then raised her eyes to Madison's. "This is it," she said. "Instructions for accessing a cloud storage account where all her evidence is backed up. Set to send everything to the FBI's Public Corruption Division and 3 major newspapers on the 2nd anniversary of her death." She refolded the O's letter. "Madison, this is enough to bring down half the city government and possibly the entire police department." "Then we should let it happen," Madison said firmly. "It's what Mom wanted." Jenkins hesitated. "It's not that simple. There are good people who will be hurt in the crossfire, and more importantly," she knelt to meet Madison's eyes, "this puts you in tremendous danger. Anyone who knows about this will want to stop it, and they'll assume you know how." "I do know how," Madison said, "and I'm not stopping it. Your father doesn't know. He never believed her." A troubled expression crossed Jenkins's face. "Madison, there's something else you need to know about your father. Something I've suspected but couldn't prove until I saw the financial records in your photo of Williams." She took a deep breath. There were regular payments from Lakeside Development to a shell corporation. The beneficial owner of that corporation is listed as Roger Carter. Madison stepped back as if slapped. "No, that's not possible." "I think your father was involved, Madison. Maybe not in your mother's death, but in the corruption she was investigating. The arguments you overheard, he wasn't just worried about her safety. He was worried about himself." The world seemed to tilt beneath Madison's feet. "I don't believe you." "I'm sorry," Jenkins stood. "But you need to be careful who you trust right now, even family." The front door opened and closed, downstairs. "Madison," Roger called. "You home, pumpkin?" Jenkins quickly handed the letter back to Madison. "Hide this," she whispered. "Trust no one until I can get federal agents involved." But as footsteps approached the stairs, Madison made a split-second decision her mother would have approved. She snapped a photo of the letter with her phone, then handed the original back to Jenkins. "You take it," she whispered. "It's safer with you." Jenkins nodded, tucking the letter into her jacket just as Roger appeared in the doorway. His expression darkened at the sight of the detective. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "You've been removed from the case." "Just checking on Madison," Jenkins replied smoothly. "Professional courtesy." "Get out," Roger said, his voice dangerously low, "or I'll call your superiors." Jenkins nodded to Madison. "Remember what I said. Be careful." She brushed past Roger, who remained rooted in the doorway until they heard the front door close. "What?" Did she want? He asked Madison, his usual gentle tone replaced with something harder. Madison thought of her mother's courage, of Devon Williams's cryptic warnings, of the detective's revelation. Who could she trust? The father who had raised and protected her, or the mother whose quest for truth had ultimately killed her? Nothing important, Madison lied, meeting her father's eyes steadily. Just more questions about the break-in. As Roger's shoulders relaxed, Madison knew that the next 24 hours would determine not just the truth about her mother's death, but whether history would repeat itself in the old farmhouse that had seen too many secrets and too much sorrow. The confrontation. The morning of the confrontation dawned gray and threatening, dark clouds hanging low over the farmhouse, as if the sky itself sensed the coming storm. Madison had barely slept, her mind churning with Detective Jenkins's revelations about her father. She'd spent the night alternating between staring at the ceiling and checking her phone for news about Devon Williams. The official story reported only that a person of interest in a home invasion case had been apprehended, with no mention of connections to Elaine Carter's murder or corruption at City Hall. Madison emerged from her bedroom to find Roger in the kitchen, making pancakes, as if it were any ordinary Saturday. The normalcy felt jarring, obscene even, given what she now suspected. "There's my girl," he said, forcing cheerfulness. "Chocolate chip or blueberry?" "Not hungry," Madison replied, watching him carefully. This man who had held her through nightmares, who had patiently taught her to ride a bike and drive a tractor, who had cried with her at her mother's funeral. Could he really be involved in the corruption that had likely gotten her killed? Roger's smile faltered. "You need to eat, pumpkin. Keep your strength up." "Why?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended. "In case someone else breaks in looking for Mom's evidence?" The spatula in Roger's hand stilled. "What are you talking about?" Devon Williams wasn't a random burglar. Madison leaned against the doorframe, maintaining distance between them. He was looking for Mom's research on lakeside development, the corruption she was investigating before she died. Roger set the spatula down carefully. "Who's been filling your head with these stories? Jenkins?" "I told you, your mother's conspiracy theories were just that. Theories. She was passionate about her causes, but sometimes she saw connections that weren't there." "Stop lying." Madison's voice trembled. "I found her research. I've seen the photos, the documents. She had proof that Mayor Thompson and Chief Markham were taking bribes from Anton Vasco." The color drained from Roger's face. Where did you find this?" "In all the places she showed me, the hiding spots you never knew about." Madison took out her phone, pulling up the photo she'd taken of her mother's letter. "And I found this. Instructions for her insurance policy. Everything gets sent to the FBI and the press on the anniversary of her death. That's why Williams came. Now they're running out of time." Roger moved toward her, hand outstretched. "Madison, give me the phone." She backed away. "Why? So you can destroy the evidence like your friends tried to do? Detective Jenkins told me about the payments, Dad. From Lakeside to your shell corporation." "Jenkins has no idea what she's talking about," Roger said, his gentle demeanor hardening into something Madison didn't recognize. "Those payments were legitimate consulting fees for environmental impact assessments. I'm a respiratory therapist. They needed medical perspectives on air quality concerns." "In cash, through a shell company?" Madison shook her head, in disbelief. "I'm 12, not stupid." "I was protecting us," Roger insisted, his voice rising. "Your mother didn't understand how dangerous these people are. I took their money to keep us safe, to convince them I was on their side. When Elaine wouldn't back down, I tried to warn her." Madison felt a chill run through her. "Warn her or threaten her?" Roger's expression crumpled. "You can't possibly think I had anything to do with what happened to your mother. I loved her. I still love her." "Then why were you arguing the night before she died?" "I heard you. You said she'd brought this on herself. What did you mean by that?" Before Roger could answer, both their phones blared with emergency alerts. A severe weather warning flashed across Madison's screen. Flash flood warnings for Detroit and surrounding counties. Outside, the wind had picked up dramatically, bending the old maple trees and sending the first heavy raindrops spattering against the windows. This discussion isn't over, Madison said, backing toward the stairs. But I need to secure Mom's darkroom. If it floods again like last spring, her negatives could be ruined. Roger reached for her. Madison, please. She dodged his grasp and ran upstairs, not toward the darkroom as she'd claimed, but to her bedroom, where she'd hidden her mother's laptop. The weather provided the perfect distraction. She quickly powered up the computer and plugged in the USB drive containing Elaine's most damning evidence. Following the instructions in her mother's letter, Madison navigated to an unfamiliar website and entered the login credentials provided. A simple interface appeared with a countdown timer showing less than 24 hours remaining and a single button labeled Deactivate Timer. Madison's finger hovered over the mouse. Her mother had designed this system as the ultimate insurance policy. If she died under suspicious circumstances, the truth would still come out, just delayed long enough to keep Madison safe until she was old enough to understand. Now that moment had arrived, and Madison had a choice to make. A thunderous crash from downstairs jolted her from her thoughts. "Dad," she called, closing the laptop. No answer came, only the howling of the intensifying storm. Madison crept down the hallway toward the stairs, the storm's fury providing a fitting backdrop to the turmoil inside the house. Halfway down the staircase, she froze. Roger stood in the entryway, soaking wet from the rain, his expression a mask of fury. Beside him stood Chief Markham in full uniform, and behind them both, looking distinctly uncomfortable, was Devon Williams, no longer in custody, but standing free in their home. "Madison," Roger called, his voice steady despite the tension visible in his shoulders. "Come down here. We need to talk." "About what?" She remained on the stairs, one hand gripping the banister, the other clutching her phone in her pocket. "About how you've brought Chief Markham to destroy Mom's evidence? Or about how Devon Williams is mysteriously out of jail?" Markham stepped forward, rain dripping from his hat onto their hardwood floor. "Young lady, I understand you're upset, but you're mixed up in matters you don't comprehend. Your mother's so-called evidence is nothing but manipulated photos and fabricated documents." "Then why are you so desperate to find it?" Madison challenged. "Why break into our house? Why intimidate a 12-year-old girl?" "No one's intimidating anyone," Roger insisted. "Chief Markham is here to help protect us, and Mr. Williams has information about your mother's death that we need to hear." Devon Williams stood slightly apart from the other men, his scarred face impassive except for his eyes, which kept darting toward Madison with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Warning, apology. "The man who killed your mother wasn't some random drifter," Williams said quietly. "He was a professional, hired to make it look like a burglary gone wrong." "By who?" Madison demanded. "By them," she gestured toward Markham and her father. "By Anton Vasco," Williams replied. "Your mother had evidence that would have destroyed not just the lakeside development, but Vasco's entire organization, criminal enterprises, money laundering, bribes that went all the way to the governor's office." Chief Markham made a dismissive sound. "Convenient theory, Williams, and why should we believe a convicted felon?" "Because I was there," Williams said flatly. "Not for the murder. I would never have allowed that if I'd known what Vasco planned. But I was working security for Lakeside at the time. I'm the one who identified Elaine Carter as a threat to the project." Madison felt her world tilt again. This man, this scarred, strange man, had played a role in her mother's death. Yet now he stood in her house, seemingly allied with her father against Chief Markham. Nothing made sense anymore. "Dad," she said, her voice smaller than she intended. "What's really going on?" Roger's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Your mother discovered something bigger and more dangerous than local corruption, sweetie. She found evidence connecting Vasco to human trafficking operations using the lakeside properties as fronts. When she told me, I begged her to take it to the FBI, not to local authorities who might be compromised, but she insisted on gathering more proof first. That's when I was assigned to watch her," Williams added. "I followed her for weeks, reporting back to Vasco. I didn't know they planned to kill her. I thought they'd just scare her off." "And you've been living with this guilt for 2 years?" Madison asked, her voice hardening. Only deciding to help after her insurance policy is about to expose everyone? Williams flinched visibly. I tried to come forward after it happened. That's how I got this. He gestured to his facial scar. Courtesy of Vasco's enforcers before they sent me to prison on trumped-up charges. I only got out 3 months ago. A massive lightning strike illuminated the house, followed instantaneously by a deafening crack of thunder. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into storm-darkened gloom. In the sudden silence after the thunder, Madison heard the unmistakable sound of breaking glass from the rear of the house. We're not alone, Williams said sharply, reaching inside his jacket. Chief Markham drew his service weapon. Carter, get your daughter upstairs now. Roger lunged up the stairs, grabbing Madison's arm. Come on. No. Madison twisted away. I don't know who to trust anymore. Another crash came from the kitchen, followed by heavy footsteps. Devon Williams positioned himself at the base of the stairs, facing the hallway leading to the kitchen. Markham moved toward the living room entrance, creating a second defensive position. Madison, Roger pleaded. Whatever you believe about me, about any of us, you have to trust that we want to keep you safe. Please go to your room and lock the door. The desperation in his voice finally penetrated her fear. Madison turned and raced upstairs, but not to her bedroom. Instead, she went directly to her mother's darkroom, where she located the hidden key to the old gun cabinet in the hall. Roger had taught her to shoot when she was 10, believing every farm kid should understand firearm safety. Madison had excelled at target practice, though she'd never imagined using those skills in a real crisis. The glass-fronted cabinet yielded her father's hunting shotgun. Madison checked that it was loaded as she'd been taught, hands trembling but determined. From the darkroom window, she could see 2 black SUVs parked haphazardly in their side yard, doors open despite the pounding rain. At least 4 men in dark clothing were visible, moving tactically toward the house. Downstairs, the first shots rang out, the distinctive pop of handguns rather than the shotgun's boom. Madison positioned herself at the top of the stairs, weapon braced against her shoulder as Roger had shown her. Below, she could make out Williams and Markham exchanging fire with shadowy figures near the kitchen. Dad, she called, unable to see him in the chaos. Stay back, Madison, came his voice from somewhere near the front door. A figure appeared at the bottom of the stairs, not her father, Williams or Markham, but a burly man in a black raincoat, gun raised as he began to ascend. Madison's finger tensed on the trigger, the weight of the shotgun suddenly enormous in her small hands. Federal agent, the man shouted, holding up a badge with his free hand. Madison Carter, Detective Jenkins sent us. The tension drained from her so suddenly she nearly collapsed. Up here. More figures flooded into the house, men and women in FBI windbreakers, moving with practiced efficiency through the rooms. The burly agent reached Madison, gently taking the shotgun. You're safe now, he said, leading her down the stairs. Jenkins received your mother's evidence dump early this morning. We've been building a case against Vasco for years, but your mother's files gave us everything we needed for search warrants on his entire operation. In the living room, Madison found a tableau frozen in mid-action. Chief Markham in handcuffs, rage contorting his features, Devon Williams sitting on the sofa, an FBI agent standing guard, and her father, blood seeping through his shirt from a wound in his shoulder, being tended by a female agent with a medical kit. Dad! Madison broke free from her escort and ran to Roger. It's just a graze, he assured her, though his face was gray with pain. I'm all right. A familiar figure entered through the front door. Detective Sarah Jenkins, rain-soaked but triumphant. Madison, she called, crossing the room in quick strides. Your mother's timer activated 6 hours ahead of schedule. Some kind of failsafe she programmed in case someone tried to access the account without deactivating it. That was me, Madison admitted. I found it, but I didn't deactivate it. I wasn't sure who to trust. Jenkins squeezed her shoulder. Smart girl, like your mother. She glanced at Roger. We'll need to talk about your involvement with Lakeside, Mr. Carter. But given Williams's testimony about your attempts to protect your wife and subsequent cooperation with our investigation, I believe we can work something out. Roger nodded weakly. eyes fixed on Madison. "I never wanted any of this. I just tried to play both sides to keep everyone safe, and I failed miserably." One of the FBI agents approached Jenkins. "Ma'am, Vasco's men are in custody. No casualties except for minor injuries. We've secured the grounds." Outside, the storm was beginning to abate, the thunder now distant rumbles rather than deafening crashes, as the first dim sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the rain-soaked farmhouse. Madison felt something shift inside her. The truth about her mother's death had finally emerged from shadow, messy, complicated, and painful, but clear at last. She took her father's hand, feeling the calluses formed by years of hard work, and the tremor that now ran through his fingers. "Mom would have forgiven you," she said softly, "for trying to protect us, even if you chose the wrong way." Roger's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not sure I deserve forgiveness from her, or from you." Madison thought of the camera upstairs, her mother's most precious possession, now passed to her, the tool that had captured truth when words failed, that had ultimately brought justice, however delayed. She thought of what her mother had always taught her about photography, that the most powerful images were those that revealed not just what the eye could see, but what the heart understood about human frailty and strength. "We'll figure it out," she told her father as the FBI agents moved around them, cataloging evidence and securing the scene. One day at a time, one picture at a time. In the driveway, Anton Vasco was being led in handcuffs toward a waiting vehicle, his imperious bearing diminished by the rain plastering his expensive suit to his frame. Madison watched through the window as the man responsible for her mother's death was driven away, Chief Markham following in a separate car. Devon Williams remained seated on their sofa, providing a detailed statement to an FBI agent. When he noticed Madison watching, he offered a solemn nod, not seeking forgiveness, but acknowledging a debt that could never truly be repaid. As the morning progressed, and the chaos gradually transformed into methodical investigation, Madison retrieved her mother's camera from where Detective Jenkins had returned it. She stepped onto the front porch and raised the viewfinder to her eye, capturing the scene of justice finally being served. Federal agents combing the property, her father speaking with investigators on the lawn, the storm clouds retreating to reveal patches of blue sky. The shutter clicked, preserving the moment when the truth, so long buried, finally came to light. Elaine Carter's final story had been told, not in words, but in the courage of a 12-year-old girl who refused to look away when faced with darkness, choosing instead to capture it frame by frame until justice was served. The media storm. The days following the FBI raid brought a storm of media attention more intrusive than the torrential downpour that had accompanied the arrests. News vans clogged the narrow road leading to the farmhouse, reporters shouting questions whenever Madison or her father appeared. Corruption exposed by slain journalist's daughter screamed the headlines. 12-year-old photographer finishes her mother's final investigation. Madison hated every moment of it. The reporters treated her like some kind of hero, a child prodigy who had single-handedly brought down a criminal enterprise. They didn't understand that she'd simply been trying to survive, to understand why her mother had died, to know whom she could trust. The weight of public scrutiny pressed down on her small shoulders until she could barely breathe. Roger Carter was released from the hospital after treatment for his gunshot wound, his arm in a sling as he fielded questions from FBI investigators about his involvement with Lakeside Development. Madison overheard enough to understand that her father had indeed taken money, consulting fees that were clearly bribes, but had done so initially to gather evidence for Elaine, then later to protect Madison after her mother's murder. The moral complexity of his choices was lost in the media's rush to categorize everyone as either hero or villain. On the third day, Madison snapped. A particularly aggressive reporter had cornered her near the mailbox, thrusting a microphone into her face while asking how it felt to be responsible for her father's arrest. "He hasn't been arrested," Madison shouted, her voice cracking. "And my mother was the real hero, not me. I was just trying to survive." She fled back to the house in tears, slamming the door against the shouted follow-up questions. Detective Jenkins, who had become a fixture at the farmhouse as the investigation continued, found Madison huddled in her mother's darkroom. "Hey, kiddo," Jenkins said softly, leaning against the doorframe. That was quite a speech out there. Madison wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. They just want a story. They don't care about what really happened. No, they don't, Jenkins agreed, settling onto the stool beside her. That's something your mother understood better than most. The difference between a story and the truth. Is that why she became a journalist? To tell the truth? Jenkins considered this. I think so. But I also think she learned something toward the end, that sometimes the cost of exposing the truth is too high. Madison stared at the rows of her mother's photographs hanging from drying lines. You mean because she died for it? I mean because of what it did to your family before she died. The secrets, the fear. Jenkins sighed. Your mother was a crusader, Madison, but even crusaders have to decide which battles are worth fighting. The statement hung in the air between them. Madison thought about Devon Williams, now cooperating with federal authorities in exchange for reduced charges, about Chief Markham, whose 30-year career had ended in disgrace, about Anton Vasco, whose empire was crumbling as associates rushed to cut deals, about her father, broken and diminished, trying to explain choices that seemed indefensible in the harsh light of public scrutiny. What happens now? Madison asked finally. Your father will face charges for accepting bribes, Jenkins said honestly, but given his cooperation and Williams's testimony about his attempts to warn your mother, I expect he'll get a suspended sentence, no jail time. And me? Jenkins's expression softened. That depends on you, Madison. Child Services has been notified as required by law when a minor's parent is under investigation. They'll want to talk about your living situation. The bottom dropped out of Madison's world yet again. They're going to take me away from Dad. Not if I have anything to say about it, Jenkins said firmly. Your father made mistakes, but he loves you. Anyone can see that. Commotion downstairs interrupted them. Raised voices, multiple footsteps. Jenkins tensed, her hand moving instinctively toward her service weapon before the familiar voice of the FBI case agent called up. Just us, Detective. Got some news you'll both want to hear. In the living room, they found Roger sitting ashen-faced on the sofa while FBI agents moved purposefully around him. The lead agent, a silver-haired woman named Adler, whom Madison had come to respect over the past days, approached them with a grim expression. We've recovered the murder weapon used in Elaine Carter's homicide, she announced without preamble. A 9mm handgun found during the search of one of Vasco's properties. Ballistics match conclusively. Roger made a strangled sound. Madison moved to his side, taking his hand. There's more, Agent Adler continued. The same weapon was used in 2 other homicides linked to Vasco's operation. We have the shooter in custody, a professional hitman on Vasco's payroll. He's already confessed in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. So, it's over, Madison said, the words feeling hollow in her mouth. They've finally caught Mom's killer. The trigger man, yes, Adler nodded. Vasco gave the order. We're filing additional charges against him today, The reality sank in. Madison felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only emptiness. Where the burning question of her mother's death had lived for 2 years, justice, she was discovering, didn't heal wounds. It merely acknowledged them officially. The media frenzy intensified when news of the confession broke. Reporters began, calling Madison the girl who solved her mother's murder, a title that made her skin crawl. Her school principal called to discuss managing her return to a normal educational environment. Normal, as if anything would ever be normal again. That night, Madison found her father sitting on the porch swing, staring out at the news vans beyond their property line. Without speaking, she sat beside him, the familiar creak of the swing, a rare comfort in a world turned upside down. I've lost everything, Roger said quietly. My reputation, my career, probably this house, once the legal bills come due. He looked down at Madison, his eyes hollow with grief and shame. I can't lose you too, Maddie. I just can't. Madison leaned against his good shoulder, watching the distant lights of the media encampment glowing like malevolent fireflies. You won't, she promised, though she knew it might be a promise she couldn't keep. The tragedy wasn't just that her mother had died, or that her father had compromised himself. It was that the truth, once fully revealed, had destroyed the foundation of Madison's world just as thoroughly as any lie. The truth changed everything. The trial and its consequences, in the aftermath of Anton Vasco's arrest and the hitman's confession, Madison found herself adrift in a sea of revelations that upended her understanding of not just her mother's death, but of her entire childhood. The narrative she'd constructed, of a random burglar, of a family shattered by senseless violence, had been replaced by something far more complex and painful. A targeted assassination, corruption, her father's complicity, however well-intentioned. 2. Weeks after the FBI raid, the preliminary hearing for Vasco and his associates began. Madison sat in the courthouse hallway, dressed in a navy blue skirt and white blouse that made her look older than her 12 years. Roger sat beside her, his arm still in a sling, his face drawn with anxiety as they waited to be called to testify. "You don't have to do this," he said for perhaps the 10th time that morning. "The prosecutor said your written statement would be sufficient." Madison shook her head. "Mom would have wanted me to speak for her in person." Devon Williams occupied a bench across the hallway, guarded by federal marshals. His testimony against Vasco had earned him a deal, reduced charges in exchange for his cooperation, but he remained in custody. When he caught Madison looking at him, he nodded slightly, a gesture somewhere between acknowledgement and apology. Detective Jenkins approached, notepad in hand. The past weeks had seen her reinstated and promoted following her role in breaking the case. "They're ready for you, Madison," she said gently. "Remember, just tell the truth as you understand it. That's all anyone can ask." Inside the courtroom, Madison faced Anton Vasco for the first time. He was smaller than she'd imagined, a thin man with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him an almost scholarly appearance. Only his eyes betrayed him, cold and calculating as they assessed her from the defense table. "Please state your name for the record," the prosecutor began. "Madison Eleanor Carter. And you are the daughter of Elaine Carter, the journalist who was murdered on May 15th, 2023? "Yes, ma'am." "Madison, can you tell the court what happened the night your home was broken into 2 weeks ago?" Madison recounted the events as clearly as she could. The intruder, the photos she'd taken, her discovery of her mother's hidden evidence. As she spoke, she felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were describing something that had happened to someone else. The 12-year-old girl hiding in a closet with a camera seemed like a character in a story rather than herself. When the defense attorney rose for cross-examination, his approach was immediately aggressive. "Miss Carter, isn't it true that you never actually saw my client, Mr. Vasco, at your home? That you never witnessed him giving any orders regarding your mother?" "No, sir. I never saw him before today." "And these supposed hiding places where your mother allegedly concealed evidence, isn't it possible you simply imagined these based on stories your mother told you, or that the items were planted there by others hoping to frame my client?" Roger half rose from his seat before the prosecutor's objection cut through the courtroom. "Badgering the witness, Your Honor, she's 12 years old." "Sustained," the judge said sharply. "Counsel, moderate your tone." The defense attorney adjusted his approach but continued to chip away at Madison's testimony, suggesting that a traumatized child couldn't be a reliable witness, that her memory was influenced by what adults had told her, that her understanding of complex financial evidence was necessarily limited by her age and experience. Throughout the grueling questioning, Madison kept her eyes fixed on a point just above the attorney's head, refusing to be intimidated. When finally dismissed from the stand, she walked past Vasco without sparing him a glance, though she could feel his cold stare following her. In the hallway afterward, Roger enveloped her in a careful one-armed hug. "You were so brave in there," he whispered. "Braver than I've ever been." Detective Jenkins joined them, her expression troubled. The defense is pushing hard on Roger's involvement with Lakeside. They're trying to paint him as the real corrupt insider who's now scapegoating Vasco to save himself. "That's not true," Madison protested. "We know that," Jenkins assured her. "But it's creating reasonable doubt in some jurors' minds." The prosecution wants Roger to accept a plea deal, admit to taking the bribes in exchange for immunity from further charges and his continued testimony against Vasco. Roger's face was ashen. If I do that, it becomes part of the official record. Madison's father will forever be known as corrupt. How will she ever explain that to friends, to college admissions boards, to future employers? Dad, Madison said, taking his hand. It doesn't matter what people think. We know the truth. But as the days wore on, and the media coverage intensified, it became clear that the truth was a luxury few could afford. The district attorney's office, facing mounting pressure to secure convictions in the high-profile case, began making deals. Devon Williams received 5 years instead of 20. 2 city councilmen involved in the bribery scheme got suspended sentences. Even Chief Markham managed to negotiate a retirement with partial pension rather than jail time. The Child Protective Services investigation into Madison's living situation added another layer of stress. The court-appointed social worker, Mrs. Diaz, was kind but firm in her assessments. She interviewed Madison multiple times, asking pointed questions about her relationship with Roger, about her feelings regarding his admission of accepting bribes, about whether she felt safe in his care. "I understand you're very loyal to your father," Mrs. Diaz said during their 3rd meeting, "but I need you to be completely honest with me. Madison, are you afraid of him? Has he ever threatened you or your mother?" "Never," Madison replied emphatically. "He made mistakes trying to protect us. That's not the same as being dangerous." Mrs. Diaz made a note in her file. "The concern isn't just physical safety, Madison. There's also the question of moral guidance. A child needs parents who model ethical behavior." The implication stung more than Madison wanted to admit. Was her father a good man who had done bad things, or a bad man who occasionally did good? The line seemed increasingly blurred. On a rainy Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the break-in that had started it all, the verdict in Vasco's trial was announced. Guilty on all counts, including the first-degree murder of Elaine Carter. The courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and angry shouts from Vasco's supporters. Madison sat perfectly still, watching as the man who had ordered her mother's death was led away in handcuffs, his scholarly demeanor finally cracking to reveal the rage beneath. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Madison and Roger. "How do you feel about the verdict? Will you be making a victim impact statement at sentencing? Roger, how do you respond to allegations that you were complicit in the corruption that led to your wife's murder?" Roger shielded Madison as best he could with his one good arm, pushing through the crowd toward Detective Jenkins's waiting car. The questions followed them like persistent mosquitoes, drawing blood with each probe. That evening, as rain lashed against the farmhouse windows in an eerie echo of the night of the break-in, Madison found Roger sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of papers before him. "What are those?" she asked, sliding into the chair opposite him. "Legal papers, Mrs. Diaz's recommendation to the court." He pushed them toward her with a defeated gesture. "She's recommending that you be placed with your maternal grandmother while I serve my community service and probation." Madison felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. "Grandma Ellis lives in Arizona. I'd have to leave school, my friends, everything." "I know, Pumpkin," Roger's voice cracked. "I'm so sorry for all of it." Madison thumbed through the report, anger building as she read Mrs. Diaz's clinical assessment of their family situation. The minor child exhibits concerning loyalty to her father despite his criminal activities, environment potentially detrimental to moral development, maternal grandmother offers stability and appropriate role modeling. "This isn't fair," Madison said, throwing the papers down. "You made mistakes, but you've always been a good father. Always." Roger reached across the table to take her hand. "The hearing is tomorrow. We can contest the recommendation." But he trailed off, the unspoken reality hanging between them. Who would believe the protestations of a confessed criminal over the recommendation of a professional social worker? Madison retreated to her room, clutching her mother's camera, as she often did in moments of crisis. Through the viewfinder, she studied the familiar contours of her bedroom, the faded blue wallpaper she and her mother had chosen together, The bookshelf overflowing with photography books and young adult novels. The corkboard covered with her own early photographic efforts alongside her mother's encouragement notes. The thought of leaving it all behind was unbearable. Yet equally unbearable was the knowledge that her father, the man who had held her through nightmares, who had taught her to ride a bike and drive a tractor, who had cried with her at her mother's funeral, was now viewed by the world as corrupt and unworthy of raising her. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Detective Jenkins stood in the hallway, rain damp and solemn. "Your dad let me in," she explained. "I heard about Mrs. Diaz's recommendation. I thought you might want to talk." Madison shrugged. "What's there to say? They've decided Dad is a criminal who can't raise me properly. End of story." Jenkins settled onto the edge of the bed. "Not necessarily the end. I've submitted my own statement to the judge about what I've observed of your relationship with your father, about his cooperation with our investigation, about the complexity of the choices he made. Will it make a difference?" "I don't know," Jenkins admitted. "But I do know this. The truth isn't always black and white, Madison. Sometimes good people make terrible choices for what they believe are the right reasons. Like Dad taking bribes to protect us." "Like that?" Jenkins nodded. "And like you following someone breaking into your house instead of staying hidden." Madison managed a small smile at that. "Mom always said the hardest part of being a journalist wasn't finding the truth. It was accepting that the truth is rarely what we want it to be. Your mother was a wise woman." Jenkins rose to leave. "Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow will be difficult enough without exhaustion." After Jenkins left, Madison sat for a long time at her window, watching the rain trace patterns down the glass. Beyond the farmhouse's comforting walls lay a world more complicated and compromised than she had ever imagined as a younger child. Her mother's quest for truth had ultimately led to her death. Her father's attempts at protection had led to his disgrace, and Madison's own courage had led not to a triumphant resolution, but to this painful crossroads. As midnight approached, Madison made a decision. If the hearing tomorrow went against them, if the judge ordered her to Arizona, she would find a way to maintain the connection to this house, to the memory of her mother, to the complicated reality of her father. The truth had torn their family apart. But perhaps in time, it could also begin to heal it. She fell asleep clutching her mother's camera, the one object that had never failed to show her the world as it truly was, both beautiful and broken, both light and shadow, both truth and consequence. The custody hearing. The morning of the custody hearing dawned clear and crisp, autumn sunlight gilding the farmhouse in a gentle light that belied the gravity of what was at stake. Madison wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton with a white collar that her mother had bought for her last birthday. Roger, freshly shaved and wearing the suit he'd worn to Elaine's funeral, kept adjusting his tie with nervous fingers. "Remember," he said as they drove to the courthouse, "whatever happens today, I love you more than anything in this world." Madison nodded, her throat too tight for words. They'd stayed up late the night before, creating contingency plans. If she was sent to Arizona, they would video chat daily. Roger would drive out for long weekends whenever possible. They would make it work. Somehow. The courtroom was smaller than the one used for Vasco's trial, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that cast everyone in an unflattering pallor. Mrs. Diaz sat primly at one table, her report prominently displayed before her. At another sat Grandmother Ellis, whom Madison hadn't seen since the funeral. Eleanor Ellis had her daughter's eyes but none of her warmth. She'd always disapproved of Elaine's marriage to Roger, considering him beneath her Ivy League-educated daughter. "Madison," Grandmother Ellis said with a stiff nod, "you've grown." Before Madison could respond, Detective Jenkins slipped into the courtroom, giving her an encouraging smile before taking a seat near the back. The bailiff called for attention as Judge Harriet Thompson entered, a stern-looking, black woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "This is a family court proceeding regarding the custody of a minor child," Judge Thompson announced, reviewing the file before her. "Given the sensitive nature and the minor's age, I'm conducting this in a closed session. She looked up, her gaze sweeping the small assembly. "I've reviewed the recommendations from Child Protective Services, as well as additional statements submitted to the court. Mrs. Diaz, you're recommending placement with the maternal grandmother." "Yes, Your Honor." Mrs. Diaz rose, smoothing her skirt. While Mr. Carter clearly loves his daughter, his recent legal troubles raise serious concerns about his moral fitness as a parent. The child needs stability and proper guidance during these formative years, and this stability would be better provided by moving her across the country, away from her school and support network, during a period of significant trauma? Judge Thompson asked, one eyebrow raised. Mrs. Diaz faltered slightly. "We felt that a complete break from the environment associated with both her mother's death and her father's criminal activities would be beneficial." Judge Thompson made a non-committal sound, turning her attention to Roger. "Mr. Carter, you've admitted to accepting bribes from the Lakeside Development Corporation. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." Roger stood straighter despite his injured shoulder. "I've taken full responsibility for my actions and am cooperating with authorities." "Yet you maintain you should retain custody of your daughter?" "I do." Roger's voice strengthened. "I made terrible mistakes trying to protect my family. I compromised my principles out of fear. But I've never compromised my love for Madison or my commitment to her well-being." Judge Thompson studied him over her glasses. "Mrs. Ellis, you're willing to take custody of your granddaughter." Eleanor Ellis rose, elegant in a tailored suit that surely cost more than Roger's monthly salary. "Naturally, Your Honor. Madison would have her own room in my Scottsdale home. The local schools are excellent, and I can provide the moral guidance she clearly lacks here." Madison flinched at the implied criticism of her father. Judge Thompson noticed and turned her attention to the 12-year-old. "Madison, would you like to share your thoughts with the court?" Rising on shaking legs, Madison faced the judge. "I want to stay with my dad. He's made mistakes, but he's a good father. He's always been there for me, especially since Mom died." She took a deep breath. "Grandmother Ellis is nice, but I barely know her. She visited once after Mom's funeral and calls on my birthday. That's not the same as being there every day, helping with homework, making soup when I'm sick and listening when I have nightmares." "Madison," Grandmother Ellis began, but Judge Thompson held up a hand. "Mrs. Ellis, you'll have your chance to respond." She turned back to Madison. "Young lady, you've been through extraordinary circumstances, displaying remarkable courage and maturity, but the court must consider your long-term well-being, not just your immediate wishes." "I understand," Madison said, clutching her hands together to stop their trembling. "But isn't my well-being connected to being with people who really know me, who understand what I've been through? Dad made bad choices, but he did it because he was scared of the same people who killed Mom. Doesn't that matter?" From the back of the courtroom, Detective Jenkins rose. "Your Honor, if I might add something to the record." Judge Thompson considered this, then nodded briefly. Jenkins approached the bench, handing over a folder. "These are photographs taken by Elaine Carter in the months before her death, part of her investigation that Madison helped recover. They show Mr. Carter meeting with Anton Vasco, but they also show something else." She pointed to specific images. "In every photograph, Mr. Carter is wearing this watch, a recording device provided by the FBI. He was working as a confidential informant before his wife's murder, gathering evidence about Lakeside Development." A murmur ran through the small courtroom. Roger looked stunned. "Your wife knew?" he asked Jenkins. "She suspected," Jenkins replied. "That's why she trusted you with her backup information. She knew you were trying to do the right thing, just in your own way." Judge Thompson reviewed the photographs carefully. "Why wasn't this information presented during Mr. Carter's plea hearing?" "The FBI operation was still active," Jenkins explained. "With Vasco's conviction secured, they've authorized its disclosure. Mr. Carter's cooperation began before he accepted any bribes. He was authorized to do so as part of his cover." Madison stared at her father, understanding, dawning slowly. He hadn't been corrupted. He'd been undercover trying to expose the same people her mother was investigating. But if that was true, then why did he plead guilty? Madison asked. Roger cleared his throat. Because after your mother died, I stopped reporting to my FBI handler. I was too scared for your safety. I kept taking the money but stopped providing information. Technically, that made me guilty. Judge Thompson removed her glasses, massaging the bridge of her nose. Mr. Carter, this places your actions in a significantly different light. Why didn't you tell your daughter the truth? The FBI swore me to secrecy, Roger said simply. And after I failed Elaine, I didn't feel I deserved any credit for trying to do the right thing, not when she paid the ultimate price for her courage. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Thompson considered this new information. Madison held her breath, feeling the weight of her mother's camera in her bag, the familiar pressure a comfort in this moment of uncertainty. I believe we need to reconsider this matter in light of these revelations, Judge Thompson said finally. Mrs. Diaz, does this information change your recommendation? The social worker appeared flustered. I would need to reassess, Your Honor. If Mr. Carter was acting as a confidential informant, that significantly alters our concerns about moral guidance. Indeed. Judge Thompson turned to Eleanor Ellis. Mrs. Ellis, were you aware of your son-in-law's cooperation with federal authorities? No, Grandmother Ellis admitted stiffly. Elaine never shared such details with me, perhaps because she understood the importance of operational security. The judge observed dryly, Mrs. Ellis, while I appreciate your willingness to provide a home for your granddaughter, I'm not convinced that removing her from her current environment would serve her best interests. Hope blossomed in Madison's chest as Judge Thompson continued. Given the new information presented today, I'm ruling that Madison Carter will remain in her father's custody, subject to monthly visits from Child Protective Services for the next 6 months to ensure ongoing stability. Mrs. Ellis, I encourage you to develop a more consistent relationship with your granddaughter, regardless of this ruling. She gavelled the hearing closed. We're adjourned. In the corridor outside, Madison flung herself into her father's arms, heedless of his injured shoulder. Why didn't you tell me you were working with the FBI all this time? I'm so sorry, Maddie, Roger murmured into her hair. I wanted to tell you, but I was sworn to secrecy until the operation concluded. And after your mother died, I was too ashamed of how I'd failed her, failed both of you, to claim any credit. Detective Jenkins approached, a small smile playing at her lips. Your mother would be proud of you both, she said. She understood better than anyone that the truth is rarely simple, rarely clean, but it's still worth fighting for. Grandmother Ellis paused on her way out, regarding them with a complicated expression. I'll be staying in town for a few days, she said stiffly. Perhaps we could have dinner tomorrow. Madison nodded, surprising herself with the gesture. I'd like that. As they left the courthouse, the autumn sunlight seemed brighter somehow, the world clearer. Madison lifted her mother's camera, capturing the moment. Her father's relieved smile, Detective Jenkins's steady presence beside them, even Grandmother Ellis's retreating figure, all part of the complex, imperfect family that remained. The shutter clicked, preserving not a perfect ending but a truthful one. In that instant, Madison understood what her mother had always tried to teach her, that photographs, like life, contained both shadows and light, both joy and sorrow. The art was in capturing the whole truth, not just the parts that were easy to look at. And the whole truth, Madison realized as she lowered the camera, was that she was her mother's daughter, a seeker of truth, a teller of stories. But she was also her father's child, complicated, resilient, capable of both mistakes and redemption. In that knowledge lay not just peace but possibility, a reflection on truth in the twilight of our years. We recognize Madison's story as our own, the complicated dance between protecting those we love and standing for what's right. How recomendado. Poor. How many of us have made difficult choices, compromising our ideals when faced with threats to our families? Roger's journey reminds us that good people sometimes make painful decisions from a place of love, even when those decisions lead down shadowy paths. Madison's courage to seek truth, regardless of personal cost, echoes the world we once knew, where integrity mattered more than comfort. Her story touches that deep yearning in all of us to be understood, rather than merely judged, to have our whole lives considered rather than just our worst moments. And when Judge Thompson recognizes the complexity beneath surface appearances, we feel a profound relief, because we too hope that someday the full context of our lives will matter more than our mistakes. Most powerfully, Madison's realization that she carries both her parents within her, her mother's hunger for truth and her father's capacity for both failure and redemption, speaks to our deepest hope, that our children will understand us completely someday, seeing both our light and our shadows and choosing to love us still. Closing note. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story, along with the city you're watching from now. See you in the next video.